Beginning on Daf Mesechtes Bava Metzia Daf Kov Zayin, begin 5 lines down at the top of the Amud, where we continue the halacha of our previous Mishnah. We're in this theme of Hamakabel Sadeh Mechaveiroi. That's the title of the parak, which again Rashi had explained that the Mishnayos are all either one or the other, either Chakranas or Kablanas. And our Mishnah is describing if someone accepts a field from his friend to work on it, and he makes up to plant one type of thing, is he allowed to switch it to something else? The Tanakh holds it depends what. Is it going to make it worse or not? Shmuel holds no, you're never allowed to switch no matter what. As we said, you make up something, you have to keep it, which the Gemara explained because maybe the guy had done some type of planting the previous year, and therefore it would affect the coming year. And our Gemara continues to explain this halacha of switching what you had made up to plant for something else. Turned to Daf today's daf should be b'nei Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael and throughout the entire world. So we're discussing today's daf are again this theme of Hamakabel Sadeh Mechaveiroi, where we discuss regarding someone who contracted to work someone else's field. If you have that there's trees between people's properties and the roots are going underneath some of the people's properties, whose do we consider the tree belonging to, and who did the payers go to? We know that the bracha we say by Berchas Hamazon that our assets should be close to town, Ayin Hara, the negative impact of having an evil eye. The pasuk says Hashem will remove all illness, which is pas shachris, that if you eat bread in the morning, that helps get rid of illness. And Mishei Chasa, the need to be careful when you're measuring people's property. To begin the card, Daf Kov Zayin, 5 lines down at the top of the Amud, we had said in the Mishnah, someone leases a field b'chakiris for a fixed price, which is he then pays the owner from that field. So if he made up to plant sa'irim, he should not plant wheat, because wheat depletes the soil more than barley does. If he made up to plant wheat, then he's allowed to plant barley instead. We said it's usher, and although it seems to be the owner's benefit, because he's doing something that's less harmful for the soil, Gemara explained because that if you alternate between planting wheat and barley, according to Rashi, damages the field. So you're not allowed to plant barley because the owner might have planted wheat the previous season. So although it technically would seem to be better, you can't deviate from what the contract was. And so to Tavua, lo yizerni kitnis, which that's the part we're up to right now, the Gemara is going to explain that if you're not allowed to plant beans in place of grain, because beans deplete the fields more than grain does. But kitnis, he's in the tvua. But if he made up to plant beans, he's allowed to plant grain instead of the beans. And Shmuel says, Asar, here too, he says it's forbidden because you're not allowed to switch what was previously made up. So the Gemara brings the words in the Mishnah, as we said, tvua le'izrena kitnis b'chulu. Masli Rabbi Huda le'Ravin. Rabbi Huda taught to Ravin the halacha of our Mishnah, not like that. Tvua, if you made up to plant grain, yizrena kitnis, you could plant it as beans. Amalei says, but Vanantanan. We learned in our Mishnah exactly not what you're saying. The Mishnah said, you made up to plant tavua grain, lo yizrena kitnis, not plant beans, because beans deplete the soil. So how are you telling me if you made up to plant grain, you're allowed to plant beans? Amalei said, lo kash is not difficult because halon. This halacha that I'm saying is for us. V'halahu, the halacha of the Mishnah is for them. Meaning the Eretz Yisrael, the Mishnayos, were taught in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is a place of mountains. You have to be concerned that you can deplete the soil, because you have very little because of the fact that it's mountain terrain. We live in Bavel, which is very muddy, and it's swampy, and it's actually very low down Bavel. Therefore, we're not concerned for depleting the land, because it's always going to be wet and moist. So therefore, you could change it whatever you want, from beans to grain, from grains to bean, because it doesn't make a difference. We're not concerned about depleting the soil, and that's why I'm telling you that if you made up to plant grain, you're allowed to plant beans. But Shimon, who says it's usher, that's again, like we had said, he says you're never allowed to change. But therefore, I'm not a contradiction of the Mishnah, because halon v'haluhu. Now, once we introduced that we said that this was Rabbi Huda and Ravin, so the Gemara brings another discussion. Amalei Rabbi Huda l'Ravin bar Rav Nachman. He says, Ravin Achi, my brother Ravin, sounds like a holy brother. Ahani tachali de bekisnim. This cress that grows amongst the flax, ain't ben mishum gezel. there's no theft. Whoever comes and tears it out, the reason for this is actually makes it better for the owner because actually it ruins his flax more than the value of the item itself. So there's no problem about stealing. But if a medis al gavulim, but if let's say this cress is on the boundary of the rows and it's not inside the flax itself, then yesh b'm b'shum gezel, then there would be a problem about robbery because it's not ruining his crop. Now, if let's say that this cress is fully grown, then then even if it's inside the flax, it would still be a problem about theft. My time, what's the reason? Because my afsid, whatever caused a loss, it already caused a loss. By ripping it out, you're not really helping the flax anymore because it already ruined whatever it did, and therefore there would still be a problem about gezel. Another teaching from Amalei Rabbi Huda Ravin by Rav Nachman. Rav Achi, my brother Ravin. Hani dili dilach. This what's mine is yours. But dilach dili, what's yours is mine. Which sounds like the famous Mishnah in Avos. But no, what we're talking about over here is there are my trees that the fruits belong to you, and there's by your trees the fruits belong to me. Why? Because our fields are near each other, and the boundaries are very high, and there are trees planted on the boundaries. There are from those that are planted in mine that the roots are bent and are tilted totally into your field, and they nurture from your field. And there are those that are yours that are planted inside mine that nourish from my ground. So therefore, he was basically telling him that although quote unquote it's your tree, but it's the roots are all the way in mine, so they're really coming from my field. And the same thing in the reverse. So he says, Nog b'nei metzra, let's conduct ourselves the way people who live on the border of each other. Ilon hanoit lekan, you have a tree that the roots are tilted to one field, lekan. The fruits go to that person. Hanoit lekan, lekan. And the one that's the roots are tilted this way, go to this person. So although technically it might look like someone else's tree, yours or mine, but it's the one whoever's roots it's coming from. Which the Gemara says, the itma, like we learned this, is the opinion of Rav. If you have a tree that's on the boundary of the property, Amar Rav says, whichever one that the field is rooted in, the fruits go to him. And if the roots are tilted the other way, it goes to the other person. Shmuel actually says no, that you divide the fruit because it's between the two of them. So the Gemara says, the Gemara actually asks on Rav that seemingly like Shmuel from the following brayse. You have a tree on the boundary between you and your neighbor. You split the fruits. You have to the Rav. The fruits Rav. Says the Gemara, Shmuel interpreted the brayse according to Rav that is Tumah b'mamalik kol hametzer kuloi. We're talking about where the tree fills the entire boundary. So the roots are tilting to both neighbors. Therefore they split it. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, what's the need to say it? Of course, the roots are by both of their properties. Says Gemara, no, the chiddush is the toli tune. We're talking about where that it carries the load of the produce and the branches. L'chad gisa, it's tilted to one side. So the Gemara says, well, still, what do you have to say? It's still, even if most of the fruit is on one side of the border, it's still between the two of them. So what's the chiddush of saying that you split it? So the Gemara, no, what would you say? That one of the neighbors could say, hey, you take the half that's by you, and I'll take the half that's by me. And therefore, one guy is going to get the majority because, it's tilting more to one guy's side. That's the chiddush. The Amal, he could tell him, my chazis the palgir hachi. What do you see to split it this way? Palikachi split it this way. What does it mean this way, that way? So like Rashi explains, in the second Palikachi, Divrei Maskell, he says that along the width of the field is what you'll divide the tree. Meaning, if let's say the field is running from east and west, you divide it north and south. So meaning, you would normally say along the property lines is how you'll split it. And therefore, one guy who it's tilted more is going to get it. Say, no, tilted this way halfway, which then they're both going to get the same amount. And therefore, that's right. Why would you do that? It's a good question. Why would you? No, he wants to know why. Why do you say that? Why don't you say that's more, wherever it's more tilted to? Right, no, he just wants to know.
That's the answer. Why do you have to say perpendicular? That certainly doesn't make any sense. Okay, so you want to say that, so that's the answer.
So another story, but Amalei Rabbi Yehuda Ravin Bar Nachman. He says, Ravin Achi, my brother Ravin, he says, Loi Tazvin, don't buy Ara Desmichta Lamasa. Don't buy a property that's near the town because people are constantly looking at your property. So don't buy near town. Like he said, it's forbidden for a person to stand over his friend's field when the field is standing with all this the grain standing up. And the reason is you shouldn't ruin it with the evil eye that you're looking and saying, wow, look at this guy's beautiful field. So you shouldn't be standing over there. So because people look, it creates harm. So don't buy a field near where everyone is near the town. Says in Israeli so, but Vashkechinah Rab Abba encountered the student of Rav. Amalu, he said to them, to the students of Rav, he said to them, "My Amar Rav Bahani Kroi." What did Rav say on these psukim in Devarim? Baruch atah be'ir, blessed are you in town. Baruch atah b'asada, blessed are you in the field. Baruch atah b'veyacha, blessed are you when you come. Baruch atah b'tzisecha, blessed are you when you go out. So, Ba'amar later they said to him, Rav, this is what Rav said. Baruch atah be'ir, blessed are you in town. You should have a house near the shul, and that's being blessed in town. The blessed in the field. This, which we say in the Birchas Balabayas, that your asset should be near town, that it shouldn't be a effort to exert yourself to have to go and gather the payers. Blessed are you when you come, is when you're coming back from a journey. You shouldn't encounter your wife to be maybe as a nida at a time when you're coming back from a journey. Rashi says for sure when she's definitely nida, but even maybe someone to say no specifically, not sure, then it's really a frustration. But al kapanim, that's blessed when you're coming in, and blessed when you're going out is sheyu tzeitzo me'echa kamaischa, meaning going out is whether it means coming out from you or when you're going out from this world, that you leave over children just like you. That's blessed when you leave too. Now, v'amalahu, however, Rabbi said to them, what you told me how Rab translated the psukim, Rabbi Yechon does not say like this. Because Elabarchata be'ir, he says, what does it mean, blessed are you in the city? That you should have a bathroom near your table, in other words, near where you live. That you shouldn't have to go too far into the fields. Now, why does he mention the word shulchan necha, your table? Is that you could check yourself if you need to relieve yourself before you eat and after you eat. Because the Gemara says in Shabbos and Memalef Menalev that if someone needs to go to the bathroom and he still eats, he's like an oven that is being heated up on the ashes of the previous heating. And after you eat, you also go to the bathroom because you have the food that's pushing and it's pushing out what was already digested. Now, if a person has to go far away, sometimes you have the pillar of excrement that's trying to get out, and you're holding it back in, and you could come to an illness called hadroikin. So therefore, Baruch Atah Be'er is the blessing that you have a bathroom in town near where you live. Avol Beis HaKnesses, but the pshat that Rav said, to have a shul near where you live, that Rabbi Yechanan says, loy, no. According to Rabbi Yechanan, that's not a blessing. That's not a good thing. Because Rabbi Yechanan goes according to his reasoning. Dami says in Mesechta a famous concept. Schar psiyos yesh. There's reward for the steps that you take to walk the shul. As Rabbi Yechanan says over there, we learned out fear of sin from a virgin, and we learned out reward of receiving a reward from a widow, because this widow walked to the next town over to Rabbi Yechanan's shul, and she said to him, and he said, "What do you mean? Don't you have a shul where you live?" She said, "Yes, but isn't there schar psiyas? That if there's a shul in my neighborhood and I come to your base of medrash to daven, I get the schar halicha schar psiyas. So therefore, that's not. You don't want to have your house right next to the shul. You want to have that you could walk a nice 15-20 minute walk coming to shul." And what does it mean, Baruch Atah Basada, bless you in the field? That your assets should be in thirds, meaning shlish b'tvua, do a third in grain, for shlish b'zeizim, a third in olives, for shlish b'kvanim, a third in grapes in the vineyard, meaning that there are certain years that the grapes and the olives are going to get ruined, but then the grain won't be ruined. Some years that you have this one will be ruined and not this one. So at least you'll have some refuge, you'll have something left over. So that's Baruch Atah Basada. And what does it mean, Baruch Atah B'vayecha, Baruch Atah B'tzesecha, bless you when you're coming, bless you when you're going. As when you leave the world, should be how you came to the world. Just like you came to the world without sin, so too when you leave the world, it should be without sin. But one thing is that we see from this is that the question is, we had said that you should not buy a property. He told his brother, Ravin, you should not buy a property that is near town, because people are going to look and it's going to create an ayin hara. But didn't Rav say that Baruch Atah Basada is that you should have nechasecha krevim le'ir, that you should have it close to town? Isn't that a blessing? So why is he telling him not to buy it too close to town? It says the Gemara is Tintam and Beis loy kasha. It's not a difficulty having a contradiction Rav on Rav, because it depends. When did we say it's a blessing to have your properties near town? Is if you surrounded with a wall, varaska, and you took a fence of thorns, so then it's protected. No one's going to be able to see. Then of course you want to have it near town. When did we say it's not good because everyone's going to be looking and gazing and gaping at your beautiful property? Is when it's not surrounded with a wall and with this fence, and therefore that would make it the difference if you should have it near town or not. Now, continuing with a teaching of Rav and regarding people's ayin hara, so the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Devarim. It says, "Vehisa Hashem mimcha kol chayli." Hashem will remove from you all illness, meaning something that all illnesses really depend on. Which Amar Rabbi says, "Zu ayin." This is the ayin ra, that people look begrudgingly at people's things. That's the source of all illness. Which Rabbi Tamei, Rabbi goes according to his reasoning. Because the Rav Salik Lebeikivi, Rav went up to the cemetery. Ovid my David, he did what he did. Meaning Rashi says he knew how to make this type of incantations on the graves to understand every single grave. What was it that the person died from? Did he die in his time? Did he die because of ayin hara? Which on the side of the Gemara they bring in the Aruch, by Ovid my David, he did a shelas chaloim, or some say he planted certain trees or whatever. The point is, he was able to figure out why people died. Amar, he said, Tishin v'tisha ba'ayin ra. Out of 100 people, 99 died from an evil eye. Ve'echad b'derech eretz, and one from a normal way of living. Which traces on the top asks, he says, wait a second. That means B'nai Yosef, who we know the Gemara tells us, Shleishot b'm ayin hara, they should have lived much longer than all the other Shvatim. How's it possible we don't find that they're that much more populated? So it says, interestingly, he says that they died b'derech eretz, in the normal way, more than others. Like Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to kill them, he would send them some other illnesses. So they were the 1%, meaning 99% die from ayin ra. Shevet Yosef, when they die in a derech eretz type of way. But 99 out of 100 people die from the evil eye. So you see how begrudging people are from your success. Now Shmuel Amar, he says, no, actually, zeharuach. When it says in the pasuk, Hashem will remove from you all illness, it doesn't mean ayin hara. It says it's the wind. Because Shmuel Tamei, the Amar Shmuel, he says hakol baruach. It says not that everyone dies from the ayin hara. Everyone dies. All illnesses and outcomes of death is because of the wind that's blowing. Everything according to the moment and according to the person. You have a certain person that a certain wind is harsh for him at a certain time. So it's the winds that cause people to die. Says, what do you mean? What are you talking about? There are many who are executed by the government and by being beheaded. They're not dying from the wind. Says, no, it's not true. Those people also, ilav zika, if not for the wind that goes into where their wound is, says Shmuel, I would make for them a medicine that connects their flesh, which is a type of a herb, as the Gemara says in Babas Daf Ayin Dal Beis, and they would live. The only reason why these people are beheaded, die, is because of the winds that go in over there. If not, I could just connect their flesh back again, and they would survive. Chaninami says Zutzina. Actually, when it says Mach Kol Chayli, it refers to the cold. So your mother and grandmother were right. It's because you're going to catch a cold. Rabbi Chanina says Hakol B'dei Shemayim. Everything is in the hand of heaven. Chutz mitzinim pachem, except for the cold wind that blows, which Rashi points out that's not the same thing as Shmuel of the wind, because Shmuel was talking about wind without cold, also is harmful. Here we're talking about a cold wind, shenem, like it says in Pasuk Mishlei, tzinim pachem, a cold wind, b'derech ikish, in the crooked path, shermanav sheyichik mehem. Someone who watches his life will stay away from these things. So it's the cold wind that you're going to catch a cold, is what is the Gemara is saying. Now Taish just points out, we know there's another famous teaching, Hakol b'dei Shemayim chutz miyiras Shemayim. So which one is it? So it says, depends what you're talking about. Here we're talking about b'mayrois habam ala adam, circumstances that come to the person. That we're saying everything b'dei Shemayim except for catching a cold. That's your fault. You didn't wear that sweater that your mother gave you. But that other Gemara is talking about midos of the person. Hakol b'dei Shemayim, your character, your personality, that's all from Shemayim. Except from yiras Shemayim, that's in your hand. So one is physical and one is more spiritual. Now Rabbi Yisrael he says a different shot. What does it mean, kol chayli? Zutzaya. This refers to excrement. Because the Amamar, like the master says, tzaya sachaitim, the excrement of the nose and the mucus of the nose, but tzaya sa'izin, and the mucus of the ear, ruben kasha, having too much of that that waste matter is harsh. Miyutin yafa, it's only a little bit that's good, but having too much is what ends up killing the person. Rabbi Lazar, he says a different shot. He says zumara. This actually refers to the gallbladder, which the bitterness of it, like the name mara, is it increases and it spreads throughout the person's ligaments and his bones. And tanim hach is similar in the brisa, that the pasuk that says vasarisi machla mikirbecha, different pasuk, that Hashem says, I'll remove the illness from your midst. Zumara. This refers to the gallbladder. Why is it called illness? It's what makes the whole body sick. Where Dava Achar, another pshat, is actually machla, the numerical value of memches lamed hey, sheshmoinim v'shleisha chaloyim, because there's 83 illnesses tluin b'mara, are dependent and come because of the gallbladder. But v'kulan, but all of the illnesses, pas shachris b'melech, having bread in the morning with salt, as the Gemara learns out later on from Sukkim, the kitin shalmayim, and the flask of water, mivat lasan, nullifies these illnesses, which Rashi points out, the flask of water is if you don't have wine. If you have wine, that's really what you have, is bread and wine. But the word machla is really the word hamelach, which is really the salt. If you have the bread with the salt and the cup of water in the morning, that will take care of all the illnesses. There's 13 things that were said regarding the benefits of eating breakfast, of having, what place can say even possibly coffee is your pashachas, but you have to have this breakfast in the morning, the cereal of champions. One thing is metzeles menacham menatzina. It protects from the sun and from the cold. Umin azikin, and the harmful winds that Shmuel had spoken about, it protects from that. Umin hamazikin, and also from the harmful spirits. Umachkim es pesi, it also makes the foolish people wise, because a person's his thoughts are settled, because he's not pained by being hungry. If he has a court case with his friend, so he's clear of mind to be able to explain very well to the court what his position is, and he ends up winning the court case. Lumad Torah Lamed also helps for a person to learn Torah and to teach Torah, because again of Yishuv Hadas, because his mind is settled, he can learn Torah now. Udrav Nishmoyim, and his words are heard by people, because he has the heart to explain it to people what his position is. V'tamud miskayim b'yadoi, and his learning is he remembers his studies. And ve'im b'sarei malahevel, his flesh does not bring out. He doesn't sweat excessively and have this smell. V'niskak le'ishtoi, he also has relations with his wife. Ve'ein mesav l'isha acheres, and he doesn't desire another woman. Meaning, if he's someone that has a lot of thoughts, and oftentimes it's illicit thoughts about other women, since he's feeling good in the morning that he had a little nice breakfast, he had his protein bar, so he goes and he petitions his wife, propositions his wife, and therefore he's together with her. When he goes out to the street and he sees women, he's not so desiring of them because he's already filled his quota already. It also destroys the intestinal worms in his digestive tract. The Yesham, some say even more other benefits are af Metzia Sakina. It also banishes jealousy, because when a person is not satisfied, he didn't have a good meal, he's easy to get angry and he can get frustrated with people. But here, if he had his good breakfast, it removes the jealousy, umachnis ava, and it promotes love by having a good breakfast. Now, Amalei, continue on this theme. Amalei Rabba Rava Bamari says, Milsi the Amri Inchi. Where do you know this idea that people say Shitin Rehiti Rohut, that 60 steps that you could run, or people that run, but they can't catch up to the guy who's got his Wheaties, who had his breakfast in the morning. The rabbis say in Arvei Pesachim and Daf Kofid Beis regarding the things that Rabbi Kiva taught his sons, get up early and have a good breakfast in the summer because of the heat, and have a good breakfast in the winter because of the cold. So where do we know this idea of how great it is to have your breakfast? So Malay says, because the Chassidus says pasuk in Yeshaya, lo yidav v'lo yitzmo, they will not be hungry, they will not be thirsty, v'lo yakum shed b'shemesh, and that the heat and the sun will not hit them. Now, you translate the pasuk like this: lo yakum shed b'shemesh, the heat and the sun will not affect them negatively, kiven de lo yidav v'lo yitzmo, because they weren't hungry and they weren't thirsty. Meaning, because they had their breakfast, that's why it's not going to affect them negatively. So Amalei said to him, you're giving me a pasuk in Yeshaya and Tanakh. I can bring you a pasuk in the Torah and Shema and Shemais. It says, that you will serve Hashem your God. He'll bless your bread and your water. What does that mean? You will serve Hashem your God. Do Kriya Shema Tefillah. That's davening your Shachris, saying Kriya Shema and Shemona Esrei. And then it says, that He'll bless your bread and your water. Do pas b'melech v'kid shamayim. This is your bread in for breakfast with the salt and the flask of water. After you daven shachris, you had a good breakfast. I'll remove the illness, says the pasuk, from your midst. Now, Tyson the Maskel Shitin Ruhati Rod says, why does it say that 60 runners will run? They won't catch up with a guy who davens, who eats breakfast. So the number 60 is because there's 60 days in the winter and the 60 days in the summer. So it's saying that eating breakfast will protect from the sun in the summer and the cold in the winter. Another pshat says Taisus, which is well known, the number 60 is always used as a hyperbolic, as a terminology of, a large number. So we use 60 as just the generic way of describing that no matter what, it's very important to have your breakfast. Now, continuing with Amalei Rabbi Yehuda, this time he's speaking with the Rav Adam Mishucha. Rav Adam Mishucha, the reason why he was called Mishucha is because he would measure people's property as a profession for buyers, for sellers, for brothers, for partners, whoever coming to divide. So you had to have someone, a surveyor, to come along and measure. So Rabbi Yehuda told him, Lo tizalzel b'mishchasa, don't be lax, or to not be exacting in your measurements, because the chalpurta chazil kukum marishka, every little drop of land is fit to plant the garden variety of saffron, which is very, very high quality of all the saffron, and therefore it's a huge value, every little bit of land. So don't think it like, okay, whatever, it's basically the right idea. Be exacting. So too, another thing he told him was, the Dalet Amis Da'anigra. What this is referring to is that there was a canal of water that they would draw from the great river to the fields along the entire valley where all the fields were. Now, all the people that had fields would not plant the edge of their fields a width of Dalet Ames, that it doesn't ruin the edge of where the canal was, and they would all have the same surveyor measure and mark off that no one should plow from that sign and further. So that Dalet Ames of Anigra, he says Zilzal Buhu. That you don't have to be precise about widening it, meaning it's okay if it's not exactly 4 amas, meaning even if it's going to be a little bit more or less, meaning you don't have to be careful to make sure that they're wider. But dan hara loitim shechinu klal, there don't measure it at all, meaning just give an estimate. And the reason is, like Rashi says, is because you want it to be recognizable to the eye that they're complete and very wide. So there you want to make sure that it actually is like a much larger. So don't do it exactly Dalet Ames. Do like estimate and therefore make it bigger. What's the pshat? What's this teaching? So he says Rabbi Yehuda Tameh. Really goes according to his reasoning. Because Rabbi Yehuda says Arba Amas da Nigra. These 4 amas of the irrigation canal is the B'nai Nigra. It's only going to harm individuals, and they have the ability to be Michael. So therefore, you don't have to be careful necessarily to make it as wide as you need it to be. But Danhara, but regarding the river itself, there it's the riverbank is the Kuli Alma. That belongs to everyone to use. And therefore, who's going to pardon if you didn't make it sufficient? So therefore, you got to make it larger, do a larger estimate, so that everyone's is going to benefit. What?
Because it could be Michael, so you don't have to be careful.
Right.
If it's wrong, it's wrong.
I guess the level of this how assiduous you got to be. He's trying to say like, okay, usually no one's exact, no one's perfect. They understand, but here the level of consequence is so much greater. So here we want you to be much more liberal in how much space you're giving. Which the Gemara continues on the related idea. Machas Rabami announced, if someone finds a forest or trees that are planted on the riverbank, so maloi kasvi nagdi, so you chop down in the width the amount of the shoulder's length of those who pull the boat by rope, and they would tilt themselves on the diagonal, and when they're going slanty towards the dry land, that the boat doesn't pull them out to the water. However much you need for their walking, that's how much you have of the trees you chop down. And this is betray Avnahari. This is done on both sides of the river. Kutsu, you chop it down because sometimes they go on one side, sometimes they go on the other side. So that's how much of the forest you got to chop down so that the bargemen have space to walk. Now, if Nasa Bahoshia cut Shitzer Amtza, he cut down 16 amas by the shore, which is the width of the path of a public street, as the Mishnah teaches in Bava Metzia Daf Tzadik Tesem Beis, the derech Rosh Hashanah Shesh Esrei Amma. So also allow b'nei Mashrunya. So the people of the town Mashrunya, which it was their forest, they ganged up on him and Dafnu, and they gave him malchus, they hit him. Who Savak Ram? The Gemara explains why, because he thought this Rav Nassim Bahoshia that the space you have to have is like the amount of a street. But it's not true. Hasan being the kulahai, for a street you need to have 16 amas. Here it's just because of we need them to have space to pull their ropes. That's kamalei kasvi nagdisagi. It's enough the amount, like we said before, of how much they have to drag on their shoulders, and you don't need 16 amas, and you shouldn't have chopped down their cherry trees that they have over there and cause such a loss. But the Gemara brings a story that Rabbi Baravuna Havlehu Abba doesn't mean a father. It means he had a forest, a Gudid Nahara, which was on the banks of the river. Amrulez, they said to him, like the halacha says, Nikutzmar, let the master chop down his trees. Amrulez said to them, look, Kutzi loy bitatoy. Let those who have the forest above me on the riverbank and those who have beneath me on the riverbank, let them chop down their trees, and then I'll chop down my trees. Says Gemara, really? How could he do such a thing? But the pasuk says in Tzvanya, is koishushu, gather yourself, for koishu, and gather by others, meaning the famous teaching of R Shloimy. He says the way it's translated is kashoit atzmacha, girdle yourself, and then girdle others. Meaning, how can you say, oh, let everyone else, first give to the fund? I'll give afterwards. No, you have to first girdle yourself, and then girdle others. How could he say others should do it first? It says Gemara, no, Hasam over there in this story, Abba, the forest that was above and beneath him was not owned by Jews, that you could force them to chop down their forest. That was the Beiparza Grafila Hava. That was from the governor of the Persians, which he knew they're not going to chop down their trees. So he says, why should I chop down my trees if they're not going to chop down theirs? Vamai says, Ikaitzu kayatzna. If they chop down theirs, I'll chop down mine. If they don't chop down, why should I chop down my trees? Because the imam techuluhu ashlayu, if they could pull their ropes and to come from place to place or from village to village, so mistagilu, then they have enough space. And as we continue to kavchasam and alf, if not, mistagilu, it's not going to be enough. They can't walk here anyway. So by default, they're going to have to go on the other side of the river, because by where the non-Jewish forest is, they're going to have to go on the other side. So what, you think when they get opposite where my land is, they're going to cross over the river? Why would they do such a thing? They always have to be on the other side. So therefore, that's why he said, let them chop down their trees first. Which the Gemara says, Rabbi Nachman have a ka'azl ba'arba. So regarding this story that we just said, there's an addendum to the story. Rabbi Nachman was going on a boat. Chazahu Abba, the koyagudid nahara. He saw there was a forest that was by the riverbank, which was the forest left over by Rabbi Rav Huna. And the reason was, like we just said, because the upper and the lower were not chopped down by the Persians. Now Rabbi Nachman didn't know that was the situation, that the upper and the lower were owned by the non-Jewish governor. So Amalu, he said to them, Deman, well, whose forest is this? So Amalu, he said to him, the Rabbi Rav Huna. Amar, he said, according to Pasuk and Sefer Ezra, V'yad hasarim, in the hands of the ministers, meaning referring to Talmidei Chachamim, Vasganim, and the deputies, this misappropriation was by them first, meaning, look, the Talmidei Chachamim are the ones that are they're sinning first. Amar said to them, Kutzu, chop down his trees. So Kutzu, they chop down his trees. I said, Rabbi Rav Huna comes, Ashker the Kaitz, he sees his forest chopped down. And he says, Man Katzi, who chopped it down, Takatz Anofe, let his branches be cut off, meaning his children will die. I mean, they said, Kulishnid Rabbi Rav Huna, all the years Rabbi Rav Huna was alive, Loikayim Lezar Rabbi Rav Nachman, there was no children for Rabbi Rav Nachman because of the curse, which Tais explains, because actually that forest itself was actually Rafila's, and so therefore wasn't really his. But the point is, he didn't realize that he didn't chop down his because of his, and therefore the curse was because of that he didn't feel it was right for someone to chop down his tree. Thank you to any time. Those things.